on this episode, as you can see, we've got coloured spaghetti all over the place, and we're going to attempt to start the engine for the first time. So what we've done is unpick the wiring loom from the Kia. We did that as we've taken the car apart, and now we've plugged it back in, put some holes in the bulkhead to run the grommets and plugs through, and now we're plugging everything we know we didn't need, airbags, door power leads and stuff, we sort of cut out already, but then there's things, and so there's other things and connection blocks that join certain sensors or certain functions to each other, so we've got to plug them all in and then work out what does what, which didn't take too long for us to get some life to show on the dash binnacle. We then carried on as we were, trying to separate wiring and any plugs that weren't plugged in by the time we got everything mostly located, or plugs that we knew we weren't going to need anymore, like I said earlier, things for the dashboard or bits and pieces that controlled the four-wheel drive system. We were able to cut them out before starting the engine, and then once we've got the engine to start, like just turn over, not necessarily run, then we can work out what we do, what we need to remove, and we can sort of play with unplugging stuff and seeing if the car still starts, or seeing what changes on the dash binnacle that we've then unplugged, like glow plugs or check engine light and that kind of thing. There was a lot of wiring. Now nothing. Nothing at all. Is it off? Okay, so that could be one of two things. Yeah. Now that we know the engine turns over, we've been cutting out a lot of wiring loom. It's just oodles and oodles of just bits of loom. This is like it's just loads of it. This is all the airbag stuff. This is something else. It's just this weighs about as much as a small child. There's a bit of weight in the old box now. But yeah, so with the fact that the car starts, we can cut wires and start removing a lot of the stuff that we don't need, or unplugging first to see what we don't need, and then cutting it out to reduce the size of the loom, so that all that we've got is the engine loom and stuff for the binnacle, and then we'll make a loom for the lights and everything else on the car, so that it's a lot easier to know what's what and trace wires and things if we make our own. We've already mounted the intercooler. It's the original from the Kia. Got a bracket here and a bracket over here. The reason for using the Kia one is we know it's the right size for the engine, and it's what we had. It saved us a bit of money on having to get one made and then having to weld it together and make it work that way. Now that we know the engine turns over, we're looking to connect everything else so that hopefully we can get the engine to now run. The first step we're going with is connecting the intercooler. That's quite a straightforward couple of tubes. Well, I say straightforward, there's a few corners we need to go around, but that is the first thing. Get the air connected, then look to get the water connected, and then move on to getting the fuel connected before firing it up. So it looks like I need to move the intercooler across a little bit, as I can't rotate this silicone elbow much more before it's touching that little plug just there. Just there. So what I'm going to do is rework this bracket, because I've never really been happy with it, to allow me to sort of slide the intercooler more that way and open up a bit of space around here. There's still plenty of space this side for everything else. I mean, the tubes are still aligned, so even if they're slightly out of alignment, because they're that close, it's just a little bit, just a case of rotating the unions to fit. Another quick part is I've mounted the fuel filter housing and priming pump. Just put it on the grill supports. So part of building something custom, something bespoke, is some of it is trial and error. So for about the millionth time I've got to take the grill and the bonnet frame off. We're still trying to finesse this intercooler position. We need to move it just a little bit further across so that we can get sort of maximum clearance round the piping between the steering rack, the intercooler, the framework, the engine, everything. So just going to whip the frame off again and go from there. So this bit of box here, I need to just take where the intercooler bolts on and move it across about the thickness or the width of these rivet nuts. I made merry with the angle grinder, a quick bit of this, a quick bit of that, and it was mounted. So this is the final intercooler piping run. We ditched the factory sort of 90 that went bolted to the front of the engine and went sort of along and down. We've kept the flexi pipe, goes into an aluminium straight into a 45 that we need to replace with a silicone joint, into the silicone joint that's then on top of the turbo, it through the intercooler, and then where it comes through the intercooler, up, round the steering column, through the gap between the steering rack and power steering pump, up here, around this bit, and into the turbo. We've got to work out what we're going to do with the intake side of things, that's all just a mock-up to get it running. Same with the power steering, got to get new hoses made, and there's a few different bits and pieces that are, I'm not going to say bodged, but we've just sort of jerry-rigged them for the time being so we can start the car. The wiring loom we've unplugged for the time being while we're doing this work, and then we'll just plug it in when we come to start the car. Suddenly realised while creating this episode that I haven't actually mentioned about the fuel tank. So this is the fuel tank we've made for the hot rod. It turned out to be quicker to make one from scratch than keep cutting up the original one. It's got this sort of cradle framework under the front / down the middle, and then this is the original fuel gauge sender from the Kia tank, and the two little ports are the only other original bits from the tank, and then just this bracket at the back to bolt it up to the chassis. Now, before we try and start the engine, I need to prime the fuel system. So we've got, just off camera, we've got a jerry can with the feed and return lines fully submerged into it. The reason for bleeding the air out is because of the way a diesel engine works. If the fuel lines have got loads of air in them, it struggles to draw the fuel to then start. So using the priming pump removes all the air and means that the fuel is right by the engine, ready to go for starting. We weren't sure if it was working, so we're just removing the fuel line to then promptly splash diesel all over the chassis rail. But that's part of learning, having not really worked on diesel engines before, having to somewhat figure it out as we go, meant we did make a little bit of a mess.
Is it off? Yeah. Put this on your inspection.
Shiny things! Please like and subscribe and hit the notifications bell to stay up to date with the latest episodes of The Build.